Michael Jordan's hand quivered. It was uncharacteristic for the greatest basketball player of all time to falter, but that letter altered everything. No sender, no explanation, just a yellowed photograph and a phrase that chilled him to the bone. You don't remember her, but she never forgot you. In the faded image, a middle-aged black woman held a boy by the shoulders. Thick smoke obscured the photo's background. The boy was him, 8-year-old Michael Jordan. But the woman? Her face was a mystery effaced by time. The envelope arrived at his Highland Park mansion without warning. None of the security personnel saw who delivered it. The cameras captured nothing, as if the letter had materialized out of thin air, carrying with it a lost fragment of his childhood. Michael flipped the photograph over. On the verso, a trembling script. She is at Sunset Manor. Room 308. She has been waiting for you for 50 years. His heart pounded. Sunset Manor. He knew the name. An asylum in Southside Chicago. The same neighborhood where he had grown up. The very place he had striven to forget once fame elevated him to the heavens. The photograph slipped from his grasp. Michael approached the window, gazing at the golden horizon of his sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate. But his mind was far away. It was 1971, the day he had nearly burned to death. The day someone had saved him. The day he could never fully recall. He retrieved his car keys. He didn't call for a driver, an assistant, or security. Some journeys must be undertaken alone. As he drove through the streets of Chicago, a question hammered in his mind. Who was this woman who had risked her life to save an unknown boy? And why had she been waiting for him for so long? Sunset Manor reeked of disinfectant and neglect. Michael Jordan strode through the dimly lit corridors, each step echoing like a war drum. The asylum was worse than he had imagined. Peeling paint on the walls, cracked flooring, and pervasive air of neglect that turned his stomach. The receptionist, a weary middle-aged woman, nearly fainted upon seeing him. Mr. Jordan, what are you doing here? I've come to visit someone. Room 308. Ah, Mrs. Mabel. She hasn't had visitors in years. In fact, she's never had any. Michael felt a pang in his chest. He ascended the creaking stairs, each step weighing him down like lead. The third-floor corridor was cloaked in near darkness. Burnt-out bulbs cast sinister shadows on the walls. Room 308. Michael took a deep breath and knocked. Silence. A knock again. Come in. The voice was faint, barely a whisper. The door creaked open slowly. Michael froze. An elderly black woman, approximately 90 years old, sat in a wheelchair, gazing out the window. Terribly thin, perilously emaciated. Her bones seemed poised to pierce her wrinkled skin. But her eyes gleamed with a disquieting lucidity. She turned slowly. Upon seeing Michael, she betrayed no surprise. Only a soft smile, as if she had been anticipating his arrival for decades. Michael, she whispered. You've grown so much. Michael's legs nearly gave way. He approached slowly, every fiber of his being recognizing something familiar in that time-ravaged face. How do you know me? My hunger left me, she murmured, disregarding his question. It was a long time ago, since you first appeared on television. I knew you would return. Michael knelt beside the wheelchair. His eyes welled up with an inexplicable wellspring of tears. He held her hand, cold and frail as wet paper. Who are you? I am Mabel Jennings, and 50 years ago, I pulled you from the flames. Michael's world shattered. Memories began to surge through his mind like boiling water. The scent of smoke, the unbearable heat, strong arms carrying him away from death. But before he could process it all, heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. Someone was approaching, and by the sound of the strides, that person was not pleased. What are you doing here? The voice sliced through the air like a razor. Michael turned to find a black man, approximately 40 years old, standing in the doorway. Tall, with well-defined muscles beneath his employee uniform, and eyes that burned with rage and mistrust. Forgive me, I'm Michael Jordan and... I know who you are, the man interrupted, entering the room with measured steps. I'm Curtis Jennings. I've worked here for 15 years. and she's my grandmother." Michael felt his blood run cold. Curtis approached the wheelchair and placed a protective hand on Mabel's shoulder. "Grandma, are you all right? Did he bother you?" "Curtis, dear, this is Michael, the boy from the fire." Curtis froze. His eyes widened, darting between Michael and Mabel. Slowly, his expression of anger transmuted into something far more complex. Surprise, recognition, and perhaps hope. "You're that boy?" Curtis whispered. "The one from the 1971 fire?" I believe so," Michael stammered. "But I don't recall everything. Only fragments." Curtis walked to an old cabinet and opened a stuck drawer. His hands trembled as he delved for something deep inside. Finally, he found what he was looking for. A yellowed envelope, sealed with aged adhesive tape. "She kept this for 50 years, Curtis said, handing the envelope to Michael. "She always said you would come back to claim it one day." Michael grasped the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavy, unusually weighty. Something significant lay within. Something that would alter everything. "What is this?" "The truth," Mabel whispered from her wheelchair. "The truth about what truly transpired that day, and why you should never have forgotten." Michael began to open the envelope, but Curtis restrained his arm. "Things are not always what they appear in this place," Curtis murmured, glancing uneasily at the door. "If you want to uncover the truth about my grandmother, you must understand that she is not here by happenstance, and she is not like this." He gestured towards Mabel's fragile frame. "Due to advanced age." "What do you mean?" "Open the envelope," Curtis said, releasing Michael's arm. "But brace yourself, because once you read this, there will be no turning back, and there will be people in this place who will not want you to leave alive." Curtis closed the bedroom door and propped a chair against the doorknob. His hands trembled as he ascertained no one was eavesdropping from the corridor. "She ceased eating 3 weeks ago," Curtis whispered, turning to Michael. "Ceased speaking, ceased living. And now you surface." Michael gingerly tore open the envelope. Within lay a journal bound in brown leather, yellowed by time. Its pages were replete with minute, meticulous script. The first entry was dated June 15th, 1971. "Today I saved a life. An 8-year-old boy, Michael Jeffrey Jordan. He will not remember me, but I will never forget him." "My God," Michael murmured, leafing rapidly through the pages. There were scores of entries, all about him, about his high school career, his college days, the NBA. Mabel had chronicled every significant milestone of his life. "She never missed a single one of your games on television," Curtis said, tears coursing down his cheeks. "Not a single one. She used to say you were the son she never had." Michael resumed reading. The most recent entries were distinct, more ominous. "They claim I am ill, but my body is merely following my heart's dictates. How can I eat when I know Michael doesn't know I exist? I tried to tell the truth about this place, about what they do to us. But no one believes a crazy old black woman. If anything happens to me, find Walter Cross. He knows everything." Michael ceased reading. His blood ran cold. "Curtis, who is Walter Cross?" The color drained from Curtis's face. He glanced nervously at the door, as if someone might be listening. "Don't utter that name in here," Curtis whispered. "Not out loud." "Why? Who is he?" "He's the administrator of this asylum. And if you read the rest of this journal, you'll discover my grandmother isn't dying of sorrow. She's being slowly murdered, and Walter Cross is responsible." Michael felt the world reel around him. He looked at Mabel, who had closed her eyes, breathing with difficulty. "She tried to expose what happens here," Curtis continued. "She tried to tell about the wrong medications, about the spoiled food, about how they treat patients who have no family to visit them. And what happened? They claimed she had dementia, that she was just a confused old woman inventing stories, and they started punishing her." Michael closed the journal, but a loose page fluttered to the floor. He picked it up and read the final entry, penned in an even more trembling hand. "Michael, if you are reading this, it's because Curtis kept his word. I don't have much time left. They are silencing me just as they silence all who dare speak the truth. But before I depart, you need to know that fire was no accident, and you weren't saved by chance. Michael lifted his gaze, meeting Curtis's desperate eyes. What do you mean the fire was no accident? But before Curtis could reply, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the corridor. Many footsteps, and a voice that made Curtis's blood run cold. Curtis! Are you in there? We need to talk. It was Walter Cross, and he was not alone. The door swung open before Curtis could react. Three individuals entered the room. A Caucasian man of approximately 65 years, clad in an expensive suit, and two women in white lab coats. Curtis, you know we don't permit visits outside of visiting hours, the man stated with a chilling voice, his small gray eyes fixed on Michael. And we certainly don't allow celebrities disturbing our patients. Michael rose slowly. Even without introductions, he knew he was looking at Walter Cross. There was something about the man that brought snakes to mind. I'm Michael Jordan. I'm here to see Mrs. Jennings. Impossible, Walter smiled, though his eyes remained frigid. Mrs. Jennings is afflicted with advanced dementia. She doesn't even recognize her own grandson. How could she possibly recognize a stranger? One of the nurses, a Latina woman in her early 30s, stepped forward. Her name tag identified her as Keisha Morales. With all due respect, Mr. Cross, Keisha stated, meeting Michael's gaze directly, Mrs. Jennings was remarkably lucid today, more so than she's been in weeks. Walter whirled on her, his eyes blazing. Nurse Morales, your duties lie with the patients on the second floor. I attend to all the neglected patients in this facility, Keisha retorted, her gaze unwavering. And Mrs. Jennings is most certainly one of them. The tension in the room became palpable. Michael realized he had stumbled upon something far more significant than a mere visit to a nursing home. Mr. Jordan, Walter stated, forcing a professional, strained smile. I appreciate your concern, but this is a medical establishment. We are bound by strict protocols. Protocols that countenance patients starving? Michael countered, his gaze fixed on Mabel's skeletal frame. Walter's smile vanished. Be mindful of your accusations, Mr. Jordan. Defamation is a prosecutable offense. My grandmother perished in an establishment just like this, Keisha burst out, her composure finally shattered. She succumbed to starvation and neglect while men in suits feigned care. Since then, I've been searching for other Mabels, and I've found one right here. Nurse Morales, you are terminated, Walter stated icily. No, Michael interjected. She is not. All eyes turned to him. Because I am going to acquire this entire facility, Michael continued, improvising on the spot, and she will be its new supervisor. Walter let out a hollow laugh. Mr. Jordan, this facility is not for sale, and even if it were, you would discover that we possess highly specific legal safeguards. What sort of safeguards? The kind that causes individuals such as yourself to fade from the public eye for leveling unsubstantiated accusations against esteemed institutions. Keisha moved closer to Michael and whispered, he is indeed correct about the safeguards. However, there's something crucial you need to understand. Mrs. Jennings attempted to expose the mistreatment, but that wasn't the sole reason they began to penalize her. She unearthed something about that 1971 fire, something a handful of exceptionally powerful men wished to keep buried. Michael felt the ground give way beneath his feet. The diary in his hands seemed to scorch him. What discovery? But before Keisha could respond, Walter Cross smiled a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Mr. Jordan, I suggest you depart. Now before this situation becomes detrimental to your reputation. Michael looked at Mabel, still motionless in her wheelchair. He looked at Curtis, whose eyes silently pleaded for assistance. He looked at Keisha, who had risked her employment to defend an elderly stranger, and he made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of all their lives. I'm not going anywhere. Michael locked himself in Mabel's room's bathroom, disregarding Walter Cross's remonstrations from the hallway. His hands trembled as he leafed through the diary, searching for the pages that might elucidate everything. The entry from June 16, 1971, made him catch his breath. The fire at the building on Maxwell Street was no accident. I saw two white men dousing the first floor with gasoline before the flames erupted. They didn't know Michael was in apartment 2B, playing while his mother worked. When I saw the smoke, I rushed inside. I found the boy cowering under the bed weeping. I scooped him into my arms and leapt out the back window. Michael closed his eyes and the memories began to return in a torrent. The acrid smell of smoke, the suffocating heat, a woman's arms bearing him away from certain death, the impact as she leaped with him out the window. He continued reading. The two men saw me saving Michael. One of them yelled, "That black woman saw us." They tried to follow me, but I knew every alley in that neighborhood. I managed to escape with the boy. The subsequent pages unveiled further terrifying details. I later discovered the building belonged to Walter Cross's father, Richard Cross. He wanted to burn everything down to collect the insurance money. It didn't matter who perished in the process. Richard Cross died in 1985, but Walter inherited his father's enterprise. He knows that I know the truth. That's why he had me committed to this asylum, to silence me. Should anything happen to me, the truth is hidden beneath the loose floorboard in my room. Coordinates, third board from the window. Michael emerged from the bathroom. Walter Cross had departed, but Curtis and Keisha were still in the room, whispering urgently. "You need to see this," Michael stated, holding up the diary. Keisha read rapidly, her eyes widening with each line. "My God, does she have proof?" Michael knelt on the bedroom floor and began examining the floorboards. The third one from the window was slightly raised. He pulled it up, revealing a hollow space underneath. Inside was a plastic envelope containing old photographs and documents. The photos showed two white men pouring gasoline on a building. One of them clearly captured the face of one of the men. "Curtis," Michael called. "Do you know this man?" Curtis took the photograph and paled. "It's Richard Cross, Walter's father." "But how?" "Mabel photographed everything," Keisha murmured, examining the documents. "Look, she kept newspaper clippings about the fire, insurance reports, even archived police investigations." The final diary entry was scrawled in an almost indecipherable hand. "They are slowly murdering me. Drugs designed to induce amnesia, food laced with debilitating agents. Yet my mind remains lucid enough to pen this. Michael, you were not merely rescued that day. You were chosen to live, to achieve greatness, to one day return and mete out justice." Michael snapped the diary shut, his gaze sweeping over the individuals surrounding him. There was Curtis, who had quietly attended to his grandmother for years. Keisha, who had jeopardized her employment to advocate for the vulnerable. And Mabel, who had safeguarded the truth for 5 decades, anticipating this very moment. "We're going to put an end to this," Michael declared, tucking the evidence into his pocket. "We will reveal to the world what has transpired." However, as they entered the corridor, 2 security personnel awaited them. Walter Cross's smile was that of a predator who had just successfully cornered his quarry. "Mr. Jordan, I'm afraid you won't be proceeding any further." "You cannot detain us," Michael asserted, meeting the gaze of the 2 security guards. They were burly men with vacant expressions, the sort who execute commands without compunction. Walter Cross chuckled, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. "Mr. Jordan, you have trespassed on private property, agitated vulnerable patients, and are now leveling unsubstantiated accusations against a respected institution. I am merely safeguarding my residents." Curtis stepped forward, his voice quivering. "Uncle Walter, you cannot do this. He merely came to visit my grandmother." "Uncle?" Michael's gaze shifted to Curtis, a bewildered expression on his face. "Walter Cross isn't just the administrator," Keisha murmured. "He's Curtis's mother's brother. Family." The revelation struck Michael like a physical blow. Curtis was not merely an employee safeguarding his grandmother. He was contending with his own uncle, an uncle who was systematically murdering the woman who had raised him. "Curtis has always been the family's perennial disappointment," Walter stated icily. "Engaged in menial labor, tending to the infirm elderly. When I offered him a position here, I presumed he would finally make something productive of his life." "Useful as in complicit in your cover-ups?" Curtis retorted, bolstered by Michael's presence. "Crimes?" Walter affected a look of surprise. "Is providing care for the elderly now considered a criminal act?" Michael retrieved the diary from his pocket. "Murder is a felony. Arson is a felony. And what you are perpetrating upon these patients is unequivocally a felony. Walter's gaze fell upon the diary, and his composure visibly faltered. The feigned smile vanished, replaced by something far more perilous. Where did you find that? Your victim safeguarded it meticulously. Mabel Jennings is a senile old woman who fabricates stories. Anything she wrote holds no legal weight. But the photographs do, Michael said, withdrawing the photos from his pocket. Photographs of your father committing murder. Walter froze. For the first time, Michael saw fear in the man's eyes. You don't understand who you're dealing with, Walter whispered. My father built an empire in this city. I merely inherited it, and I protect what is mine. You protect it by killing witnesses? I protect it by eliminating problems, Walter corrected. Just as my father eliminated the Maxwell Street problem. Just as I eliminated the problems that arose subsequently. What other problems? Walter smiled again, but now it was a smile of pure venom. Do you think you were the first to come seeking the truth? There have been others. An investigative journalist in 1985, a former police officer in 1993, a social worker in 2001. All asked the same questions. All uncovered the same things. What happened to them? The journalist had a car accident. The police officer suffered a sudden heart attack. The social worker, well, she simply vanished. Keisha gripped Michael's arm. He's confessing, she whispered. He's confessing because you won't leave here alive, Walter completed the sentence. It's far more straightforward this way. Michael Jordan, the famous basketball player, suffered a heart attack while visiting a nursing home. Very sad, very convenient. One of the guards withdrew a syringe from his pocket. Clear liquid. Michael didn't need to be a doctor to know it wasn't a vitamin. Curtis, Walter said calmly, you may leave. He's family, but keep your mouth shut about what you've seen here. No, Curtis said, interposing himself between the guards and Michael. I won't let you do this. Then you will die with them. Walter sighed. What a pity. Your mother will be devastated. The guard approached Michael with the syringe. It was now or never. Michael had a decision to make. Resist and potentially perish on the spot, or endeavor something that might save them all. Walter, Michael said, retreating slowly. Do you want to make a deal? Walter paused, intrigued. What kind of deal? I have something you want, and you have something I want. Proceed. Michael took a deep breath. He was staking everything on one decisive move. I'll surrender the incriminating evidence and never utter a word about this again. In return, you'll release us all and guarantee Mabel receives appropriate care. Walter guffawed. Mr. Jordan, do you truly believe I'd be so foolish? I believe you're shrewd enough to realize that assassinating Michael Jordan would draw far more scrutiny than you could possibly manage. Walter's laughter ceased abruptly. Michael had struck a nerve. Proceed. Should I vanish, half the globe will descend, demanding answers. The media, the FBI, private investigators. You might be able to contain the fallout from a journalist's demise, but can you truly manage an international inquiry into Michael Jordan's death? Walter remained silent for a protracted moment. Michael could almost hear the cogs whirring in his mind. What is your proposition? You release me. I pledge never to set foot here again. And in exchange for what? I will make you immensely wealthy. Walter Cross gestured the guards away with a dismissive wave. His entire demeanor shifted. The ruthless predator transmuted into a shrewd, calculating businessman. Mr. Jordan, you now command my undivided attention. I'm aware you're not merely an asylum administrator, Michael stated, slipping the evidence into his pocket. Individuals of your ilk don't soil their hands with menial tasks. You're here for an ulterior motive. Highly astute. Proceed. This asylum serves as a mere facade. You're exploiting these forgotten patients for some grander scheme. Experimental pharmaceuticals? Insurance malfeasance? Money laundering? Walter's lips curved into an impressed smile. All three conjectures are accurate, but there's more to it. Far more. He ambled towards the corridor window, his gaze sweeping over the asylum's inner courtyard. Dozens of elderly residents shuffled aimlessly, their eyes vacant, their movements rote. Do you know the inherent flaw with individuals of prominence, Mr. Jordan? You harbor the delusion that the world revolves solely around you, that your existence holds more weight than others. What exactly are you driving at? My family has maintained dominion over this asylum for 4 decades. 4 decades of admitting patients whom no one desires, no one visits, and no one cares whether they live or perish. 4 decades of being remunerated by the government to tend to them. Walter pivoted, his eyes alight with a feverish intensity. Do you comprehend the true worth of a disposable human being? It far exceeds your wildest estimations. Pharmaceutical trials command $50,000 per patient. Elaborate fraud operations yield millions annually. And organs, intact and fully functional organs, fetch a fortune on the black market. A wave of nausea washed over Michael. You're talking about mass murder. I'm talking about business, Walter corrected him. These individuals were already effectively deceased upon their arrival here. Alone, forgotten, without kin, devoid of purpose. I merely expedite the inevitable and imbue their pathetic existences with a final utility. Curtis had gone ashen. Uncle Walter, did you do this to all of them? Not all. Some pass away naturally before we can utilize them. Others, like your dear grandmother, required special handling. Why her? Because she knew too much, and because she had family who cared. Walter's gaze turned glacial as he looked at Curtis. You're the only one who still visits regularly. That draws unwelcome attention. Michael spotted a document on the nurse's station desk. He snatched it before Walter could react. It was a medical report bearing the heading, Nutritional Curtailment for Fiscal Containment. Fiscal containment? Michael read aloud, his voice laced with disbelief. Are you starving people to death to cut costs? We are optimizing resources, Walter replied impassively. Patients in a terminal state do not require full nutritional support. It is more humane to allow them to pass naturally. And who determines who is in a terminal state? I do. Keisha could no longer contain her outrage. You're a monster. These people entrusted you with their care. These people were abandoned by their own families, Walter retorted. I merely finalized what was already set in motion. Michael rapidly scanned the document. It contained a list of names, dozens of them, each entry marked with dates for protocol initiation and treatment conclusion. Mabel Jennings, Michael read. Protocol initiated 3 weeks ago. Reason, inconvenient witness. She should have been dead 50 years ago, Walter stated icily. In the fire, along with you. My father failed that day. I do not intend to repeat his mistake. So you admit it was murder. I admit it was business. The building was operating at a loss. The insurance paid out 3 times its actual value. My father invested that money and built this empire. Michael pocketed the document along with the other evidence. And how many people died to build your empire? As many as were necessary, Walter replied, including you, if you don't accept my proposition. What proposition? Walter smiled, reverting to his customary business demeanor. You are wealthy, exceedingly wealthy, and you require investments. I operate a network of geriatric care facilities across 12 states. Officially, we are a clean and profitable enterprise. Unofficially, well, you've seen how it functions. You want me to finance your murder scheme? I want you to be my silent partner. Invest $10 million and you'll receive 20% of the annual profits. And you'll never again need to concern yourself with inconvenient elderly individuals safeguarding secrets about your past. Michael feigned consideration of the proposition. 20% seems rather paltry for $10 million. 30%, Walter immediately counteroffered. And Mabel? Mabel will receive the utmost care until she passes away naturally. At 90 years of age, that shouldn't take long. Michael glanced at Curtis and Keisha. Both were aghast, but understood he was merely stalling for time. I need to review the figures, Michael stated. Financial reports, property listings, profit projections. Naturally, my office possesses all of that documentation. And where is your office located? Walter hesitated for a moment. In the basement of this building. Level B2. Restricted access. Michael had obtained the information he required. If Walter maintained records of all operations in the basement, Then that was where the conclusive evidence of his crimes resided. I wish to examine everything now, Michael asserted, before making any determination. Impossible. The files are secured in time-locked vaults. Then I shall return tomorrow. On one condition, Walter stated, regaining his composure. You leave Mabel's keepsakes here as a guarantee of good faith. Michael withdrew the diary and photographs from his pocket. Walter eagerly extended his hand. No, Michael stated, returning them to his pocket. These remain with me until we finalize the deal, as an assurance that you will keep Mabel alive. Walter clenched his fists. Mr. Jordan, you are playing a dangerous game. No, Michael retorted. I am toying with a man who has far more to lose than I do. It was then that Michael's mobile phone rang, an unexpected call that would completely alter the course of the evening. Michael Jordan? The voice on the other end of the line was familiar, yet Michael couldn't quite place it. Who is this? Detective Sarah Martinez, Chicago Police Department. We received an anonymous tip regarding suspicious activity at Sunset Manor. Are you all right, sir? Michael gazed at Walter, whose face had drained of all color. Detective Martinez, Walter snatched the phone from Michael's hand. Detective, this is Walter Cross, administrator of Sunset Manor. Everything is under control. Mr. Jordan was here for a charitable visit and was just leaving. Mr. Cross, I need to speak directly with Mr. Jordan. Walter hesitated, then handed the phone back. Detective, Michael interjected quickly, I need you to come here immediately. There are things happening in this place that… The line went dead. Walter had disconnected the call. That was exceedingly foolish, Mr. Jordan, Walter stated, slipping the mobile into his pocket. The police are already en route. Detective Martinez is an old acquaintance. She understands how this city operates, and she knows that some institutions are untouchable. Keisha moved closer to Michael. He's bluffing. The police cannot disregard a report involving you. Care to wager? Walter smirked. Sarah Martinez was promoted to detective after she shelved the investigation into that journalist's death in 1985. The same journalist who was investigating my family. Michael's stomach sank. She's in on your scheme? She's been on my payroll for 20 years, Walter affirmed. Curtis erupted. Uncle Walter, how could you have become this? You were different when I was a child. I remember you speaking about justice, about aiding the less fortunate. Walter laughed bitterly. You remember incorrectly, boy. I never spoke of justice. I spoke of power, and power is attained by eliminating obstacles. What obstacles? People like your grandmother. People who harbor inconvenient secrets. People who believe truth is worth more than life. Keisha cut in. Walter, I looked you up before I started working here. You were a civil rights activist in the 80s. You organized protests, helped impoverished families, fought gentrification in South Side. And where did that get me? Walter exploded. 10 years fighting for what was right, and I ended up poor, hated by white people, and scorned by black people who thought I wasn't radical enough. So you gave up. I evolved. I learned that the world doesn't reward idealists. It rewards those with the courage to do what needs to be done. Murder isn't evolution, Michael said. It's cowardice. Cowardice? Walter laughed. You want to talk about cowardice? Where was your courage when Mabel spent 50 years forgotten in this place? I didn't know. You didn't know because you chose not to know, Walter yelled. You had the resources to investigate your past. You had the connections to uncover the truth. But you preferred to live your gilded life pretending the rest of the world didn't exist. Michael was hit hard. You're right, Michael admitted. I was a coward. But that doesn't justify what you're doing. It justifies it perfectly, Walter retorted. You rich and famous people live in your gilded bubbles while people like my family do the dirty work that keeps society running. Dirty work? Do you think nursing homes like this exist out of charity? They exist because someone needs to get rid of inconveniences. The demented elderly, the terminally ill, the troublesome witnesses. Someone needs to make them disappear. Walter walked over to one of the corridor windows. My father started small, a fire here, an accident there, eliminating specific problems for important people, Politicians who needed to get rid of skeletons in their closet. Businessmen who wanted land occupied by poor people. Judges who had inconvenient secrets. And you expanded the business. I industrialized it. Why eliminate one problem at a time when you can process dozens simultaneously? This nursing home alone solves about 200 problems a year. Michael felt nauseous again. 200 people. 200 problem, Walter corrected. The difference is fundamental. The moment someone becomes a problem, they cease to be a person. It was then that Keisha showed him something she had found on a nearby table. It was a printed list with names and photos. Michael recognized some of the faces. Individuals who had appeared in the media searching for missing relatives. Walter, Keisha's voice trembled as she spoke. Are these the problems from the past 6 months? Some of them, the most lucrative ones. Michael took the list and found something that made him stop breathing. A familiar photo, a name he knew well. James Washington, Michael read aloud, 67 years old, former high school basketball player. Diagnosis, early onset dementia. Do you know this man? Curtis inquired. James was my high school coach, Michael whispered. He called me 3 months ago saying he wanted to tell me something important about my past, about people he had known when I was a child. And? I was busy. I said I'd call him back. Michael looked at Walter, who was smiling with satisfaction. James Washington never had dementia, Walter stated, but he knew too much about certain influential Chicago families, including mine. What did you do to him? The same thing I'll do to you if you don't stop asking inconvenient questions. It was at that moment that the asylum lights went out, completely. The entire building plunged into total darkness, and in the silence that followed, Michael heard something that chilled him to the bone. The sound of multiple pairs of feet approaching through the corridors. The darkness of the corridors swallowed Michael like a hungry maw. Every shadow seemed to harbor a threat. Every whisper of the wind through the cracked windows sounded like a harbinger of danger. The scent of mold and cheap disinfectant that permeated the walls of Sunset Manor now carried something more sinister. The metallic tang of fear. Michael pressed his body against the cold wall, feeling the rough texture of the peeling wallpaper against his skin. His muscles were taut as piano wire, every fiber of his being on high alert. 50 years of life, of victories, of glory. And it could all end here, in the very same kind of place where his journey had begun. It was then that he heard. Walter Cross's voice sliced through the silence like an icy blade, each word delivered with the chilling precision of an executioner. Protocol Omega. Eliminate everyone. Make it look like an accident. Michael's blood froze in his veins. The words echoed in his mind like pistol shots. Protocol Omega. There was something in the way Walter uttered those words that suggested it wasn't the first time he had used them. How many others had heard that death sentence? Michael closed his eyes for a moment, attempting to calm the heart that pounded like war drums in his chest. His mind flew back to that night in 1971, when he was just 8 years old and the world was ablaze around him. He had survived the impossible once. He would have to do it again. But this time, he wasn't an 8-year-old boy running from fire. He was a 60-year-old man, with creaky knees and reflexes that were no longer what they once were. This time, he wasn't alone. Other lives hinged upon him. Michael gripped Curtis and Keisha by the arms with a surprising burst of strength. His fingers found muscles taut with fear, skin trembling with the same urgency that pulsed in his chest. Curtis was rock solid, yet Michael could feel the involuntary tremor coursing through his body. Keisha was smaller, more fragile, but there was a resolve in her muscles that reminded Michael of his own mother, a woman who had never flinched in the face of danger. Now, he whispered, his voice barely audible, each word weighted with 50 years of survival. The three moved like specters through the darkness. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled. The corridor stretched before them like a tunnel to hell, the dim emergency lights casting dancing shadows that seemed to reach for them with spectral fingers. Michael could hear the sound of his own heartbeats echoing in his ears like war drums. He could feel the cold sweat trickling down his back, leaving icy trails on his skin. Fear was a living creature in his gut, writhing and expanding with every passing second. They reached Mabel's room. Michael closed the door with a surgeon's precision, his hands moving slowly to avoid any sound that might betray their location. The lock's metal was icy against his skin, and he could feel the vibration of every minute movement through his fingertips. The dresser groaned as he dragged it to block the entrance. The sound seemed to detonate in the silence like a cannon shot. Michael felt his heart lurch into his throat. The noise had been too loud, too conspicuous. Everyone froze. The silence stretched into an eternity. Michael counted the seconds, 1, 2, 3, each one dragging on like an hour. He could hear Keisha's labored breathing, the rustle of Curtis's clothes against each other, the faint hum of medical equipment in Mabel's room. They waited. Nothing. Perhaps the sound hadn't been as loud as it seemed. Perhaps Walter's men were on another floor. Perhaps they still had a few precious minutes. "Mabel," Michael whispered, his voice laden with a desperation he frantically sought to conceal. "Where is there another exit on this floor?" In the darkness, he could just discern the outline of the wheelchair, the frail silhouette of the woman who had saved his life so long ago. Mabel appeared smaller than he remembered, as if the years had literally diminished her bones. But when she spoke, her voice still carried that indomitable strength he recalled from childhood. "Emergency stairwell," she whispered, each word a sharp blade. "End of the corridor, but it's been locked for years." Michael felt a pang of despair. A locked exit was tantamount to no exit at all. "Curtis, do you have keys?" The hesitation in Curtis's voice spoke volumes before he even responded. It was the kind of silence that portended ill tidings. "Not for the emergency stairwell. Only Walter has them." Of course, only Walter possessed them. The man had engineered the perfect labyrinth, a prison disguised as an elder care facility where he maintained absolute dominion over every ingress and egress. It was then that Michael heard the sound that turned his blood to ice in his veins. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, numerous. The sound echoed through the corridor like hammer blows, each step perfectly synchronized with the others. These were not the hurried steps of amateur guards. These were the measured movements of professionals, men who knew precisely how to hunt and kill. Michael pressed his ear to the door, his skin touching the cold wood. He closed his eyes and concentrated, employing skills he had honed on the perilous streets of Chicago as a child. When survival hinged on knowing how many adversaries you faced, their point of origin, and their velocity. 4 men, perhaps 5, all moving with the assuredness of predators intimately familiar with every inch of their territory, all armed if the steady cadence of their steps and their lack of hesitation were any indication. Michael could picture them, men with impassive faces and lifeless eyes, the kind of men Walter Cross would employ for his illicit undertakings. Men who had forfeited their humanity somewhere along the way, who viewed people like Mabel not as human beings, but as problems to be eradicated. "Keisha," Michael whispered, his mind racing at full throttle, considering and discarding possibilities with the speed of a computer. "Is there a phone in this room?" "Only the one at the nurse's station," she replied, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "But they've probably cut the lines." Michael felt the crushing weight of responsibility descend upon his shoulders like a mountain. Those lives hinged on him. People who had trusted him, who had believed he could make a difference. Yet he was just a man, a 63-year-old man with failing knees and reflexes that were no longer what they once were. What if someone could make it there? "It's worth a shot," Keisha replied. But even as she spoke, everyone in the room knew it was a suicide mission. The nurse's station was on the opposite side of the building, through corridors now swarming with hunters. Michael pulled the diary and the photos from his pocket. The paper felt warm against his fingers, as if imbued with the warmth of all the tears Mabel had shed upon it over the years. These were the only proofs he possessed, the sole pieces of evidence that could expose the truth of what had transpired in this place. He gazed at the photos in the dimness, barely able to discern the images. But he knew them by heart now. Young, strong, courageous Mabel. Mabel saving an 8-year-old boy from the flames. Mabel dedicating her life to caring for others, only to be abandoned when she herself needed care. "If anything happens to me," he said, handing everything to Curtis, his hands trembling slightly. "Take this to the media. Any media. National, if possible." Curtis took the documents as if receiving sacred relics. His large, calloused hands, hands that had toiled hard his entire life, enveloped the papers with a delicate touch. "Michael, no," Curtis whispered, and there was something in his voice that sounded like a son pleading with his father not to go off to war. "We're not separating." But Michael was already moving, his mind having already calculated the odds. Four people moving together, including a 90-year-old woman in a wheelchair, stood no chance against armed professionals. But a lone man, a man who had spent his entire life being underestimated, who had transmuted low expectations into fuel for greatness, that man might just stand a chance. "The three of you can't move quickly enough with Mabel in her wheelchair," he explained, his voice imbued with the authority of one accustomed to making impossible decisions under duress. "I'll create a diversion." "What kind of diversion?" Keisha asked, though her tone betrayed her foreknowledge that she would not welcome the answer. Michael looked at the window. 3 stories high. The ledge on the second floor seemed precarious, as if it had been an afterthought added by the original architect. The Chicago night wind howled fiercely, making the window rattle in its frame. "I'll give them what they want. Me." "Michael, you're insane," Keisha whispered, her voice fracturing with panic. "You'll get yourself killed." Perhaps she was right. Perhaps he was insane. But Michael Jordan had spent his entire life doing things others deemed insane. He had leapt from gravity-defying heights, launched shots from positions that seemed unfeasible, and achieved victories everyone had declared unattainable. But Michael was already moving toward the window. His hands found the latch, and he forced it open with strength born of sheer resolve. The metal was frigid against his skin, covered by a thin film of ice that abraded his fingertips. "Michael Jordan didn't die in the fire 50 years ago," he said, bracing himself for what might be the final leap of his life. "And he's not going to die in a nursing home today." The icy Chicago night wind assailed him like a physical blow as he leaned out of the window. The air was thick with ice crystals that pricked his skin like tiny blades. Below, the city lights stretched out like an ocean of stars, each representing a life, a story, a hope. For a moment, Michael Jordan, the man who had soared across basketball courts, who had defied gravity and redefined the very boundaries of possibility, hesitated, not because he feared death. Death was merely another adversary, and he had faced down adversaries his entire life, but because he feared failure. Fear that Mabel would perish believing he had forsaken her, just as the world had forsaken her. A pervasive fear that history would recur, that once again people would forget the voiceless, those unable to advocate for themselves. A fear that Curtis, Keisha, and Mabel would die because of him. But then he heard Mabel's voice whispering behind him, faint but imbued with all the strength she had displayed that night 50 years ago. "Fly, boy, fly as you always knew how to fly." And with those words, Michael Jordan leaped into the night. The night air swallowed him like an icy embrace. For an eternal second, he was merely a shadow against the city lights, a man suspended between life and death, between past and future. The world moved in slow motion. He could discern every detail of the approaching ledge, the cracks in the concrete, the icicles hanging like teeth, the accumulated snow that would render the landing even more treacherous. The impact against the second-story ledge sent waves of pain through his ankle like shattered glass. The agony was so intense that for a moment he couldn't breathe, but he held on, his hands finding the rough concrete, nails scraping against the icy surface. From above, he could hear the voices of Walter's men, distorted by wind and distance. "Where's Jordan? Search every room. Find him now." Michael forced himself to move, disregarding the pain that climbed his leg like liquid fire. He descended to the first floor using an external pipe that creaked and groaned under his weight like a dying animal. Every movement was pure agony. Every breath was a stark reminder that he was no longer the young athlete who had conquered the world. But he was something more potent now. He was a man with a mission, a man with a debt to repay. The rear emergency door yielded under his pressure with a clang that seemed to reverberate throughout the entire building. Michael froze, expecting to hear rushing footsteps, shouting voices, weapons being cocked. Nothing. Sunset Manor at 2 in the morning was a labyrinth of dark, silent corridors. The dim emergency lights cast pools of sickly yellow light that only intensified the surrounding shadows. The air was heavy with the scent of cheap disinfectant, spoiled food, and something more sinister, the pervasive odor of neglect and abandonment. Michael followed the signs on the wall, his hands tracing the path like a blind man reading Braille. Each step led him deeper into the heart of the corruption that had poisoned this place. He could sense the specters of the residents who had perished here, forgotten and forsaken. The first-floor nursing station emerged as a beacon of faint illumination amidst the pervasive gloom. The telephone stood there, black and inert, a silent pledge of salvation. Michael dialed the emergency number, his hands trembling so violently that he fumbled the digits on his first attempt. Silence. He attempted once more, compelling himself to focus. Nothing. There wasn't even a dial tone. Walter had indeed severed the lines, rendering the edifice an island of isolation amidst the sprawling metropolis. It was then that Michael perceived something that irrevocably altered the situation. A computer, still powered on. The screen glowed like a lone star piercing the darkness, its screensaver displaying exotic fish circumnavigating endlessly. Connected to the internet. Michael's heart leaped. He had no need for telephones that could be severed. Nor did he require journalists who could be bought off or coerced. He possessed something superior. He possessed the entire world. His hands trembled as he moved the mouse, causing the fish to vanish and revealing the login screen. But fortune favored him. Someone had neglected to log out. Michael opened the browser and navigated directly to his Twitter account. Each second stretched into an eternity. Every letter he typed was a bullet fired against the injustice that had governed this place for so long. I am trapped at Sunset Manor, Southside Chicago. Administrator Walter Cross is killing patients. I have proof. If anything happens to me, look in the building's basement. Grenchers help. Marcia, Chicago, Sunset Manor. But as he typed, Michael heard something that made his blood run cold. Footsteps. Many footsteps. Approaching swiftly. The thud of military boots against the linoleum, each step reverberating like pistol shots. He had found salvation, but perhaps too late. Michael pressed send and watched the screen, praying the message would be transmitted before it was too late. The nursing station door burst inward like a bomb. Wood splintered, hinges groaned, and Walter Cross entered with 4 men who resembled soldiers straight out of a nightmare. They were precisely as Michael had envisioned. Tall, muscular, with faces that appeared to have been hewn from stone. Their eyes were vacant, devoid of any trace of humanity or compassion. Their weapons were aimed with deadly precision, and Michael could discern that they would not hesitate to use them. "Mr. Jordan," Walter uttered, his voice laden with the satisfaction of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. "Quite creative, but you underestimated one crucial detail." Michael stared at the computer, anticipating confirmation that his message had been dispatched. His hope turned to ash when he saw what appeared on the screen. "Connection error. Message not sent." "What?" Michael inquired, though he already knew the answer. "I control the company that provides internet to this neighborhood. Your posts never left these premises." The cruel truth hit Michael like a punch to the gut. The computer was connected to the internet, but the connection was being filtered, controlled. Walter had crafted a flawless illusion, a network that appeared operational but was, in truth, a digital prison. "But it was a commendable attempt," Walter continued, and there was something in his smile more chilling than any weapon. "Now come with us. Your friends are waiting." The armed men moved with military precision, encircling Michael like wolves closing in on wounded prey. He could feel the heat of their bodies, the scent of their garments, the tension in their muscles poised for violence. They escorted him through the corridors as if he were a prisoner of war. Each step led him back to the 3rd floor, where fate and death awaited him. Curtis, Keisha, and Mabel were in the hallway precisely where Michael had left them, but now they were surrounded by additional security personnel. Mabel was in her wheelchair, but even in the dimness, her eyes shone with the same indomitable light that had guided Michael out of the fire 50 years ago. Curtis seemed to have aged a decade in the past 10 minutes. His shoulders were stooped, as if the sheer weight of the situation had physically borne down upon him. But there was something in his posture that suggested he hadn't capitulated. Not yet. Keisha stood beside Mabel, a protective hand on the older woman's shoulder. Her clothes were rumpled, her hair disheveled, but her eyes blazed with a rage Michael recognized. It was the same fury he had felt his entire life when confronted with injustice. "How did you find us?" Michael asked, though he already knew the answer would be yet another revelation of the extent of Walter's control. "Infrared cameras," Walter explained with pride, like a teacher lecturing a particularly slow student. "This building has more security than a federal penitentiary. We need to protect our investments." The word investments exited his mouth like venom. Michael then understood the full extent of the dehumanization that had infected this place. To Walter, people like Mabel were not human beings with histories, dreams, and dignity. They were numbers on a spreadsheet. Assets to be managed, problems to be solved. "What are you going to do with us?" Michael asked, though he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. Walter smiled, and it was the coldest smile Michael had ever seen. "Fire," he said simply, and the word fell into the air like a death sentence. Terribly ironic, wouldn't you say? Michael Jordan dies in the very type of accident that should have claimed his life 50 years ago. Michael felt the world spinning around him. History was repeating itself with a cruelty that seemed orchestrated by fate itself. The boy who had escaped the fire would be consumed by fire. The man who had flown would be brought down by the flames. "And the investigations?" he asked, desperate to buy time, to find some way out he hadn't yet considered. What investigations?" Walter laughed, the sound like shattering glass. 4 people tragically died in an accidental fire at a poorly maintained care home. Detective Martinez will conclude it was the negligence of the previous owner. I naturally narrowly escaped and am devastated by the tragedy. The chilling detachment with which Walter spoke of their deaths was almost surreal. This was not a man who had lost his humanity. It was someone who perhaps had never possessed it. Walter nodded to the men, who began to pour gasoline through the corridors as if watering a garden of death. The smell hit Michael like a punch to the gut. It was the same odor that had filled his nightmares for 50 years. The scent of everything he had lost. The scent of everything he had feared. The scent of death approaching with inevitable steps. The liquid spread across the floor in glistening puddles, reflecting the dim lights like sinister mirrors. Michael could hear the sound of it dripping, each drop marking another second closer to his end. "Walter," Curtis pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "She's your mother's sister. She's your aunt. What would your mother think if she saw this?" What happened next was the most terrifying moment of all. Walter didn't just smile, he laughed. "My mother died young because she had no money for proper medical treatment," he retorted, his voice laden with decades of bitterness. "Because she wasted all her time caring for people who weren't worth saving. I won't repeat her mistake." Michael then understood the depth of the tragedy. Walter was not merely a villain born of greed. He was a man who had been broken by the very system that had attempted to break Michael. But where Michael had found strength in adversity, Walter had found hatred. Where Michael had learned to fly, Walter had learned to destroy. The acrid stench of gasoline grew unbearable, searing Michael's nostrils and throat. He knew they had mere minutes, perhaps less, before Walter ignited the blaze. It was then that his gaze fell upon Mabel. The woman who had saved his life sat serenely in her wheelchair, her hands calmly folded in her lap. There was no trace of fear in her eyes, only a profound tranquility that Michael found inexplicable. "You did what you could, child," she whispered, her voice imbued with the wisdom of 9 decades of life. "Sometimes, that's all that's required." But Michael Jordan had never been a man to settle for "that's all that's required." He had spent his entire life demonstrating that the impossible was attainable, that boundaries existed merely to be transcended, and he was far from ready to yield now. It was then that the impossible occurred, the distinct wail of sirens, distant yet unmistakable. The sound swelled like a symphony of hope, each note a louder promise than the last. Walter scrambled to the window like a man possessed, his movements suddenly frenetic. How? He murmured, his voice cracking for the first time. How do they know? Michael smiled for the first time since he had been thrust into this nightmare. Because I recorded a video that was automatically dispatched to 10 different journalists. Impossible, Walter whispered, his facade of control finally fracturing. You couldn't have had the time. I have the best media strategists in the world, Michael stated, his voice imbued with the unwavering confidence that had forged him into a legend. They've taught me stratagems you couldn't possibly conceive. The sirens were drawing inexorably nearer. The sound reverberated through the streets of Chicago like the roar of an awakening dragon. Walter began to descend into a full-blown panic, his movements becoming increasingly erratic. Kill them all! Now, before they reach us? But before the men could even react, something extraordinary transpired. The hallway windows imploded inwards in a deluge of shattered glass and blinding light. SWAT operatives stormed the premises like avenging angels descending from the heavens. Their silhouettes were stark against the floodlights of the hovering helicopters, their weapons aimed with lethal precision. Chicago police! Get on the ground! Now! Walter Cross was tackled to the ground before he could even strike a match. The man who had ruled this domain like a tyrant was utterly neutralized in a matter of seconds. Michael Jordan finally exhaled. But when he looked at Mabel, he recognized something that made him realize the true victory was yet to come. She was weeping, not from fear, not from relief, but from unadulterated gratitude. 50 years, she whispered, her tears glistening like diamonds in the siren's glow. 50 years waiting for you to return. Michael knelt beside her wheelchair, his own tears beginning to fall. I never left, he said, gently clasping her fragile hands in his. I just didn't know where you were. And in that moment, 50 years of separation dissipated like smoke. 3 days later, the entire world knew Mabel Jennings' story. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, all major news networks were covering the Sunset Manor scandal around the clock. Michael was at the hospital tending to Mabel when the nurse brought in a stack of letters. Mr. Jordan, another 500 letters arrived for Ms. Jennings today, from all over the world. Mabel, now receiving proper nutrition and appropriate medical care, had regained a measure of strength. Her eyes sparkled as Michael read some of the letters. Dear Mabel, thank you for saving our hero. You are my hero too. Signed, Sarah, 8 years old, Denver. Ms. Jennings, I never thought I would one day write to a stranger, but your story brought tears to my eyes. I am going to visit my grandmother at the nursing home today. John, Boston. Mabel, you proved that one person can change the world. Michael Jordan changed basketball, but you changed Michael Jordan. Maria, São Paulo, Brazil. Keisha entered the room with a tablet in her hand. You guys need to see this. The hashtag #Mabel Hero has been trending worldwide at #1 on Twitter for 72 straight hours. What about Walter? Michael asked. Held without bail. The FBI found evidence of at least 300 murders over the past 20 years, not just at Sunset Manor, but across the entire network of care facilities he controlled. Curtis rushed in, holding a newspaper. Grandma, you're on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. The headline read, The woman who saved Michael Jordan and exposed the largest mass murder scandal in Chicago history. Mabel smiled faintly. I was never famous, but I saved a life. And that life changed the world. You changed far more than that, Michael said, holding her hand. You saved hundreds of people who were still alive in Walter's facilities. And you alerted the entire world to this type of crime. The door to the room opened. Detective Sarah Martinez entered, handcuffs in hand. Detective Martinez, Michael stood up. I thought you were working for Walter Cross, she finished. I was, for 20 years, and now I'm going to pay for it. She placed the handcuffs on the table. I want to officially surrender, and I want to tell you everything I know about the network of corruption that allowed Walter to operate with impunity for decades. Why now? Because when I saw that 90-year-old woman in the wheelchair, almost starved to death, I remembered my own grandmother. I remembered who I was before I sold out. Martinez knelt beside Mabel's chair. Ma'am, I humbly apologize. I helped silence you and hundreds of others. I will dedicate the rest of my life to rectifying this egregious error. Mabel raised a quavering hand and touched the detective's face. We all deserve a second chance, dear. Michael received a call. It was his attorney. Michael, you need to know. The FBI wants you to testify before Congress regarding this case. They aim to establish a federal law for the protection of institutionalized seniors. The Mabel Act, Michael said, gazing at the woman who had twice transformed his life. Precisely. When he hung up the phone, Michael made a decision he had been contemplating for days. Mabel, he said, I want you to come live with me. My house is far too spacious for a single occupant, and you deserve to be cared for by someone who genuinely cares. Michael, I'm a burdensome old woman. You have your own life. You gave me my life, he interjected, twice. The first time when you pulled me from the flames. The second when you showed me who I truly was. Curtis smiled. Grandma, please accept. You deserve to be happy. Mabel closed her eyes, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. My appetite has returned, she whispered. For the first time in months, I have a hunger for life. Michael embraced her tenderly, as if she were made of crystal. Then let's eat. Let's eat and live and share this narrative with the world at large. But a final surprise awaited them. A week later, Walter Cross secured an exclusive interview from prison. Even from behind bars, he had not relinquished his fight. Michael watched from the hospital as Walter appeared on television, clad in an orange uniform, yet still maintaining his arrogant demeanor. Mr. Cross, the reporter inquired, what do you have to say about the charges of mass murder? I have to say that Michael Jordan is using a sick elderly woman for self-promotion, Walter replied calmly. He trespassed on my property, disturbed vulnerable patients, and is now fabricating a fanciful conspiracy to portray himself as a hero. Michael felt his blood boil. He won't succeed, Keisha said, entering the room. Everyone knows the truth. But people have short memories, Curtis observed, if he manages to sow seeds of doubt. Walter continued on television. Mabel Jennings suffers from advanced dementia. Any purported writings or statements from her lack credibility. Michael Jordan is exploiting a vulnerable woman to fabricate a heroic narrative for himself. What about the physical evidence? The reporter pressed. What evidence? Archaic photographs that could easily have been doctored? A journal penned by a woman with mental health issues? Documents that might have been fabricated or planted? Michael recognized Walter's astuteness. Despite all the evidence, he was attempting to sow reasonable doubt among the public. Are you alleging that Michael Jordan orchestrated all of this? I'm asserting that celebrities will go to any lengths to maintain relevance, and exploiting vulnerable seniors is particularly reprehensible. The interview was having the desired effect. Michael observed social media commentary beginning to cast doubt on the story's veracity. Is Jordan not overreaching? Why did he wait 5 decades to seek out this woman? How convenient to surface now, just when he's in need of positive publicity. They're sowing seeds of doubt, Michael murmured. Michael, Mabel said from her hospital bed, don't concern yourself with what they're saying. The truth always comes to light. Yet Michael knew Walter was right about one thing. People were inclined to believe the worst about celebrities, and the narrative of a celebrity exploiting an ailing elderly woman was far more compelling than the truth. It was then that Curtis burst into the room. You have to see this, he exclaimed, cranking up the television's volume. An older man had appeared at the police station. Michael recognized him instantly, even after so many years. James Washington, Michael whispered, my former coach. James was alive. Gaunt, frail, yet alive. I escaped, James told reporters. I feigned my death for 6 months, in hiding, awaiting an opportunity to reveal the truth. What truth? Walter Cross abducted me because I knew about the 1971 fire. I knew Michael Jordan's family. I knew Mabel Jennings. Michael was incredulous. James was alive and corroborating everything. I have a recorded confession, James continued, producing a small device from his pocket. Walter Cross admitting to all the crimes. He had no idea I was recording. The reporter took the device. Within seconds, Walter's voice was being broadcast live across the entire nation. James, you will die like all the others who knew too much. I killed the witnesses, and I'm going to kill you too. Michael felt his legs give way. The confession was clear, unequivocal. On television, Walter's attorney was attempting to mitigate the damage. This recording was obtained illegally and under duress, but it was already too late. Walter's own voice had demolished his defense. Michael's phone rang. It was the producer of a major television program. "Michael, we want you and Mabel on the show tonight, live, to tell your side of the story." Michael looked at Mabel, who nodded faintly. "Let's do this," he said. "We're going to tell the entire world who Walter Cross truly is." The television studio was packed. Cameras from all the major networks, journalists from around the globe, and a live audience that included families of Walter Cross's victims. Michael pushed Mabel's wheelchair to center stage. Though frail, she was resolute. Keisha and Curtis occupied the front rows, lending their moral support. "Good evening," the host commenced. "This is a special broadcast concerning the case that captivated the United States. Joining me are Michael Jordan and Mabel Jennings, the woman who saved his life half a century ago." The audience offered a respectful ovation. Mabel gestured with a tremulous hand. "Mrs. Jennings," the host inquired gently, "are you indeed able to recount the events of that day?" Mabel drew a deep breath. Her voice emerged faint yet distinct. "I was never renowned, nor did I ever aspire to be. Yet I saved a life, and that life, in turn, reshaped the world. Recount for us the day of the conflagration. I witnessed two Caucasian men dousing the edifice with gasoline. Unbeknownst to me, a child was inside. Upon seeing the smoke, I simply fled. Any individual would have done likewise. But it was not merely anyone," Michael interjected, gently clasping her hand. "It was you, and you endured an immense cost for that." "Mrs. Jennings," the host pressed on, "why did you never endeavor to locate Michael subsequent to his ascent to prominence?" "Because I was aware that Walter Cross was keeping me under surveillance," she murmured, her voice hushed yet distinct. "He exerted control over every aspect, and I had no desire to jeopardize anyone's life again." Michael gave her hand a firm squeeze. The camera zoomed in on the poignant gesture. "But it was not merely anyone," he reiterated. "It was you, and you endured an immense cost for that." A palpable silence descended upon the room. Mabel defiantly raised her chin. "I remained quiescent, believing the world had forgotten. But it has not forgotten," she met Michael's gaze. "And in light of that, I have truly begun to live anew." Her words permeated the hall, akin to a whisper universally apprehended. The host then addressed Michael. "What compelled you to pursue this narrative?" Michael pondered for a moment, then spoke, his gaze averted from the camera. "Because I am entirely indebted to her. When I was merely 8 years old, I very nearly perished in that conflagration. Yet someone carried me in their embrace, traversed the flames, and brought me to safety. I spent my formative years oblivious to the identity of my rescuer, until this very moment." Mabel offered a faint smile. A single tear slowly tracked its path down her cheek. "And what now?" the journalist queried. "What is the fate of Walter Cross?" Michael inhaled deeply. "Walter has been apprehended. He will be held accountable for every transgression, the destruction of evidence, institutional dereliction of duty, and criminal neglect in providing assistance. This time, the truth will not be relegated to oblivion." Curtis, positioned at the rear of the hall, exhaled a protracted sigh. Keisha struggled to suppress her tears. The nation watched in real time. "Most importantly," Michael continued, "this woman, this hero, was finally heard." Mabel slowly turned to face the audience. "I never sought fame. I just wanted no one to be forgotten as I had been. I wanted no one to starve for dignity, for respect." The crowd applauded, not with the polite applause reserved for artists, but something deeper. It was as if they were saying, "We are sorry it took us so long." Michael held the microphone once more. "Starting today, I am launching the Hunger for Dignity project. Its aim is to fund, renovate, and oversee neglected nursing homes across the United States. Because no Mabel will ever be forgotten again. Never again." The audience erupted in applause. Hearts pounded, eyes welled up. Curtis walked onto the stage. For a second he hesitated, but Mabel extended her hand. He took it, then looked at Michael. I thought you were just another celebrity seeking attention. But you stayed, and you saved her." Michael met his gaze, serious. "She saved me first." Curtis smiled, a brief but genuine smile. And then, with the world watching, he leaned in and embraced both his grandmother and Michael simultaneously. The entire world witnessed that embrace. 3 generations united by something ineffable: gratitude, redemption, remembrance, and hope. That night, Mabel Jennings's name appeared in every news report, not as a victim, but as a symbol of strength, of courage, of justice, and in every corner of the country, in every home where someone had once felt forgotten, a flame ignited. Because someone, at last, had been remembered. If this story has resonated with you in any way, if it made your heart beat faster or reminded you that every life holds intrinsic value, subscribe to the channel. Here, every story is an act of remembrance, of justice, and of love, and you are a part of it.